Welcome back to The Remote Life. My name is Han Talbot, also known as Han Meets World, and today we'll be chatting with Alex Trembath. Originally from the UK, Alex and his partner Lisa are the founders of Career Gappers, which inspires people to blend work and travel through workations, sabbaticals, and business trips. In this episode, we talk about living the remote lifestyle from a remote base, their workation process, and talking to your manager about taking a workation. So grab a coffee, a tea, or something stronger, and let's get started. Amazing stuff. Alex, welcome to the Remote Life podcast. How are you this morning?
I'm very well, thank you, Han. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
No, you're very welcome. So let's dive straight in. Tell us about you and your remote life journey so far.
Right, so where do I begin? So my name's Alex, and I work together with my wife and business partner, Lisa, on a blog called Career Gappers, which we launched 6 years ago in 2018. But our journey with remote working and travel goes back a little bit further than that. So we both have spent many years working in particularly communications and marketing roles, but we both traveled a lot with our work. So in 2017 and 2018, we took a year out together, a sabbatical effectively. I quit my job at the time. Lisa took an arranged sabbatical with her workplace to travel for a year. And it's something we'd been saving up for quite a bit of time, with this vision that we wanted to embrace more travel in our lives. I had been doing a job before that involved a lot of travel anyway, though. So I was doing work that had taken me to China, Brazil, Ethiopia, Uganda, some really interesting travel destinations, really got a taste for that. And this experience of having a sabbatical year, and this is something that many people will tell you who've taken a career break for similar reasons, caused us to rethink our lifestyle and our perspective and what we wanted from life. There's actually a great piece of research done by something called the Sabbatical Project. I'm not involved with that myself, but we did an interview with the guy who created it. Has spoken to a lot of people who have taken sabbaticals and found recurring themes that are similar. One of those was that there's often a catalyzing incident causes people to take a sabbatical, whether it's a breakup or something like that. But a commonality is that people will make big lifestyle changes to focus on different priorities in life when you return home. And when we were chatting just before we went live, then you mentioned about reverse culture shock. And after returning to London, having spent a year traveling, we certainly had that feeling of, okay, we're back in the throng of London life and the pace of that. Lisa going back into her job. We made a series of decisions then would reshape the way we approach life and travel and work. Where one of those was moving away from London. One of those was founding our blogging businesses, which has been quite a journey through the pandemic, and I can talk about that a little bit. But also prioritizing spending more time with family, but also traveling more and finding the balance between those things. So we moved to Lincoln in the UK, which is a historic city. It's a lot quieter than London. And we spent a couple of years, Lisa still in full-time work, me working full-time on the blogs until the pandemic arrived. And Career Gappers, when we created it, was initially about encouraging and inspiring people to take career breaks and sabbaticals, largely inspired by our own experience of that. But we also wanted to have an element of focusing on what are the benefits for organizations and business leaders as well. So it's sort of two angles there, like, what can individuals get out of this? How can it improve your life? Not just the experience itself in terms of the travel experience, but also what are the actual professional benefits? Because there certainly used to be a taboo about the idea of taking a career break. Are you taking a step back? Are you doing damage to your longer term career if you take time out of your work to travel? All of the evidence, when you look at people who have done it, is exactly the opposite, that it can open up new doors in your career. And we wanted to tell that story, but we also wanted to make the case to people, to business leaders as well. So we would do things like interview people who had introduced progressive sabbatical policies and talk about what the benefits are to organizations as well. But then the pandemic arrived, and that created, for everyone working at travel, it was a very difficult moment. The nuances for us particularly were that not only was the world of travel ground to a halt, but then the fact that what we were doing was talking about taking time out of your career and a sabbatical and the perceived risks involved with that. So not only were people not wanting to travel during the pandemic or not able to, there was also people potentially less likely to take what would be perceived to be a risk time when there was so much uncertainty in all aspects of life. So we had quite a reflective few months, and we explored ways that we might diversify what we were doing. The journey that we went on through that was that we wanted to, instead of focusing just solely on sabbaticals and career breaks based on our own experience, but explore more broadly how people can blend work and travel in different ways. And again, this was linked to one of our own experiences. So I think it was towards the end of 2020 when, after the first couple of lockdowns had happened in the UK, there was a little bit more flexibility to be able to, you couldn't travel internationally at that point. Lisa's family were going for a week away. They'd booked a cottage to go away for a week. And typically when Lisa's family do that, we would go with them. But it was late in the year and Lisa had used all of her annual leave allocation. And we initially just assumed, okay, well, we're not going to be able to do this. Sorry, we've got work commitments. Lisa can't take any more annual leave. But then we thought, well, actually, we can come. We can just come and work while we're there. This wasn't something new that arose just because of the pandemic. People had been talking about workations for years before, but I think the pandemic has brought this idea into the zeitgeist a bit more. But for us, that was like a realization moment. Okay, we can work and travel as well. We were aware of the digital nomad movement and that kind of thing. But what we thought this was an opportunity for was to speak to a different demographic of people who are in a sort of a fixed lifestyle, who have a permanent home, who have lived an office life, as you were, but now suddenly have the flexibility to travel and, well, to work more flexibly and to utilize that in a bit of a different way. So not to have a permanent travel lifestyle, but to be able to use that flexibility to travel more frequently and have a different kind of blend between your work and travel lifestyle, if you like.
This is the Remote Life podcast, and obviously, as you and I both know, there are many different shapes and sizes that lifestyle comes in. So you mentioned that you have a remote base in the UK, and you'll take a workation for a week, 2 weeks, longer. What was it for you guys that made you pick that route versus, say, the full-time digital nomad lifestyle on the road?
Okay, so we had a fantastic experience traveling long-term on a sabbatical. But like many people, I think some of the more chaotic and uncertain elements of long-term travel, if that was to become a permanent thing, are perhaps not for us. We like to have some elements of certainty, some elements of having a permanent base in our life. So we live very close to Lisa's family, for example. We have family commitments in the UK. We have a dog. We have work commitments that do have an element of needing to be there. It's not, so for example, the organization that Lisa works for has a very flexible working approach where there is no requirement at all. It's not a hybrid office, but there is an element of face-to-face. They will have face-to-face meetings periodically, and they also have a co-working space in our home city in Lincoln where people who work at that organization can choose to go and work. And that brings a really positive element of human connection that we like to have. I also do consultancy work for an organization that I previously used to work for full time before I was on sabbatical. And that also has a face-to-face element. So we have these commitments and aspects of our lifestyle where we could, don't get me wrong, we could probably choose to embrace digital nomadism full time and make it work. But we like the more certain aspects of having a home base. And taking workations frequently give us that opportunity to have all those home comforts, but also be able to travel almost pretty much whenever we want. Now, in the UK, obviously this is different for people in different jurisdictions, but in the UK, typically someone working in an traditional office environment will have, say, 25 days plus bank holidays of leave to take in a year. I know in the US that's quite a bit less than that, and the culture around leave is a little bit different. But for us, prior to having this workation lifestyle, we would have maybe taken 4 blocks of maybe had 4 blocks of a week away during the year and use the other days to take some long weekends. But what we can do now is use that a lot more frequently and periodically I'll give the example of my mother lives in Cornwall, which is about 6 hours drive away from us. She moved there nearly 10 years ago now. And that has meant that prior to the pandemic, it was quite difficult for me to spend time with her. But what we'll do now is that and it's become a thing in winter, in January, we'll take 2 or 3 weeks to drive down to Cornwall, spend that time there. We will have an office space there and work there for 2 or 3 weeks while we're there and spend time with my mum. And we can do that 2-3 times or more a year if we want. And it doesn't eat into our annual leave in the way that doing that would have done previously. And we can use our leave to take workations in different ways as well. Like we will like to do things like take a European city break, maybe work 2 or 3 days while we're there and have 2 or 3 days exploring. And every workation we take is different, and a workation might look very different to different people in how they use that time. But the bigger picture for us is that it makes our leave go a lot further, and that brings a lot more joy into our life. It brings a lot more flexibility into our life. And I think certainly from my own perspective, it's meant there's been less stress. I have more freedom to be productive and creative. There are many benefits that has brought. But at the same time, we still have Lisa's family 5 minutes drive away from us at home, and we can see them several days a week if we want to, which we usually do.
For sure. Yeah. And I like that you guys also champion that way of doing things. Because I think a very big misconception about remote lifestyle, remote work, digital nomadism is that you can only do it a very certain way. And that's just not true. There are so many different ways that you can live remotely and have that flexible lifestyle that suits you and suits how you like your needs, essentially. And one question I do get asked quite a bit, which you may be able to give some advice around, is because again, like I think that there's a very big misconception about like, oh, if I want to live the remote lifestyle, if I want to become a digital nomad, whatever it is, I have to quit my 9 to 5, I have to become a freelancer and da, da, da. But as you mentioned, Lisa has a remote full-time job. For anybody who perhaps isn't in doesn't have a job where they allow that flexibility already, but is maybe considering asking their bosses for, say, some workation time. Do you have any advice for anybody who's considering that conversation with their boss or manager?
Absolutely. And there are quite a few similarities with this and the way you might ask your boss or manager for a sabbatical as well, which is something that we often are asked about and that we can give some advice on. But so the first thing, before you even get to the stage of having that conversation with your manager, I think it's really important to check, like, does your organization have not necessarily a policy? Is there a precedent in place for this at your organization? So I think many organizations are at different stages of experimenting with this. And I think we're still in that post-pandemic phase of organizations realigning themselves to the realities of a different remote working world. So if you're working in an organization and you're not aware that this is a policy that's in place, you haven't seen that other people are doing this in your workplace, where I would usually start with that is, what are the benefits that this would bring to your workplace? And you could frame that in terms of, what are the specific concerns you think your manager will have? Like, everyone's relationship with their line manager is different, but what are the concerns that you think they might have about this? Is it that they're worried that it might set a new precedent for everyone wanting to do the same thing? Is it that they might be concerned that you won't do your job properly? What are the concerns that they might have, and arrive with solutions for that? It might be around the work arrangements. Like, if this is something that's completely new to the organization, it hasn't done before, what will it look like? How will you fulfill your duties? How will you make sure that you're going to the right meetings and things like that? Whatever it is, come forward with solutions ready for how this will work structurally and what the arrangements might be, and have in mind what are the answers to the problems that you anticipate that your manager will have. And you can give examples as well. I mean, there are already many studies out there that show the many different ways that changing your work environment makes you more productive and creative, that the benefits in terms of mental health, the benefits in terms of giving your organization a more rounded employees, the experience and development that it can give you as an employee, and how that will benefit your organization. So I would be, rather than approaching it from the perspective of I'd like to go to Turkey for a week and I'd like to work there, or whatever it might be, approach it from the angle of why is this something that could be really beneficial to both you and the organization. And you could also look at what are the examples of other organizations that are already doing this and what policies do they have. I mean, I've mentioned previously that Lisa has a job where the organization, as a result of the pandemic, went fully remote. And just to give a little bit more context there, she was working in that job and in that organization before the pandemic, and it was a fully 9-to-5 office job. We lived five minutes away from the office, but the organization took what I think was quite a radical step at the time to completely sell off their offices, which I don't think many organizations actually went that far so quickly. But Lisa's organization sold off their office and went fully remote, and I think they're still adapting to that, but they do have things like a remote work policy in place that has stipulations around workations. It's very flexibly worded, which I think is the right way to do it, where it gives autonomy to managers to have discretion in what they might allow and how they might approach it. But there is a policy in place, and it's something that's working quite well. It's evolving. So what you could do is look for other examples out there. You might be able to download policy wordings of other organizations to show, like, this is something that other organizations are doing, and this is working really well. Your organization might already be well aware of this, but it's good to, at the very least, be equipped with that knowledge yourself and be equipped with that evidence for when you have the conversation.
For sure. That's an interesting approach, actually. And just taking it back to maybe the person as an individual as well, like, is there anything that they could maybe consider from like a day-to-day structure as well? So for example, I know I've worked on contracts where for the first like 15 minutes of the day, I'll have a check-in with like whoever like my point of contact is, or the manager or something like that. Is there anything you would maybe suggest, like from that point of view? Like, what for you, I guess, helps you to set up your remote work day?
I think a lot of that might really depend on what the values of the organization that you work for are, and the relationship that you have with your manager in particular. From my own personal perspective, I like to make sure I have certain elements of structure in place when we go on workation that are actually quite similar to what I do at home. And as you gave the example of a contract where you might have a 15-minute check-in. And when I go on a workation, and certainly if I was going to be asking a manager whether for an arrangement like that, I would be looking for ways that I can make sure that I would still fulfill those kind of contractual obligations. How you make sure you're still having the right check-ins with your team, with whether it's people you're managing or with your colleagues. I mean, I would personally select destinations that have the right infrastructure and also the right time zone difference that would enable me to fulfill any of those kind of obligations. But yeah, as I say, it might be completely down to whatever the dynamic is. An alternative could be that a case for taking a workation is that you have a very specific project that you're working on, or a task for which you would really benefit from having a laser focus that takes you out of that organizational environment. So let's say I had a report to write on something that would take several days of research and writing, and that I think that for me to deliver that report well, it would be beneficial for me to be switched off from the everyday organizational environment. So the case for that kind of workation might be, okay, I want to deliver well on this report for you. I think if I can extract myself from the everyday work environment for a week, I can deliver on this to an incredibly high standard, because I will have a very particular focus on it and I won't have all of those distractions. So Again, it might depend on the reasons that you're taking a workation. So there isn't a one size fits all. It's got to be about having a nuanced conversation with your manager based on what the relationship is and what your organization dynamic is.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a funny thing because I think when people think about destinations from a remote work or workation perspective, it's always sort of from the short-term tourism visitor perspective. But what people don't necessarily think about also is, are there the correct co-work spaces? What are the apartments like? What's the Wi-Fi speed? Are you going to, for example, I know some people who work in positions where they have to be wary of GDPR laws and cybersecurity. So they can't, for example, maybe leave the EU. So it's just small bits and pieces that people don't necessarily factor in that I think are important to think about, along with, yes, I'll be available from 9 to 5. Yeah, there's a little bit more to it than just that. So I'm glad you touched upon that. And funnily enough, I actually had a question for you about how you pick your destinations. So yeah, why don't you talk us through a bit of your workation process in general, from selecting the destinations to what research you might put in place. Talk us through it.
So I think the first thing to say in terms of selecting a workation destination is that the requirements that you might need for looking for a workation destination won't be as rigorous, I don't think, as someone who is a digital nomad and looking for a place that has the right infrastructure to be a long-term working destination. There are certain basics that I think you will obviously need, like good connectivity. You might need access to certain things. But in terms of the destination from its working infrastructure, the considerations might be just a little bit different from if you were looking to stay there longer term. Whereas for me, it's more about what's my reason for being there? What's the type of workation experience that I'm looking for? And we will tend to try out different. We'll tend to use that freedom that we have to take workations to try out different experiences. So in the past before, we've taken a workation where we've gone on a completely off-grid retreat in the UK to a rural area, hired a log cabin that didn't even have internet, but we took work that we could do offline for 2 days. That's not something that everyone would be able to do. But more typically, a more typical type of workation that we would look for in terms of the destination would be, we will tend to look for city destinations. The reason we like going to cities for workations, for a start, we like city travels, we like city breaks, but they tend to have a great infrastructure in terms of coffee shops, in terms of co-working spaces, in terms of different types of accommodation. And that leads me on to what I think should be the first consideration, which is what is the kind of working environment, what is the kind of working environment that you would like to have when you take a workation? What would your desk look like? Would you be happy staying in a hotel that has a desk in the room and working from there? Personally, I don't like to do that because I like to keep separate where I work and where I sleep. It kind of reminds me of when I first began my remote working journey, and Lisa and I were living in a flat in London where we just had a room, and I was working and living in the same room the entire time, and I'd wake up thinking about work. I think it's healthier to separate your work environment from where you sleep. So, but you might be fine just for a week or two staying in a hotel that has a desk, or you might prefer to hire an apartment that has a good workspace, or, and this is what I prefer to do, is look for somewhere that has interesting places that you can get out and work outside of where you're staying. And for me, that's one of the big benefits of taking a workation. So I would look to maximize that. So how can you switch up your environment? Could it be a city that has a great coffee culture where there's great little cafes where you can plug in? Could it be a city that's known for its co-working spaces? Or as long as there is one very good co-working space that has flexible packages. So most co-working spaces now have day rates. Not all of them do, but it's a good idea to check that the destination that you're looking at has a co-working space where you could hire a desk for the day. And I'll give the example. So I've just been on a workation to Alcudia in Mallorca, which is a historic town on the north side of Mallorca, which is a little bit quieter than the more touristy southern side of the island. And there is a historic town inland, but there's also a beach port area. And there is just one co-working space there in the area, but it's a it has a really vibrant mix of people who are permanent members of the co-working space and people who are just passing through. And the mix there is very different to what I tend to see in co-working spaces, where very often it's more heavily weighted towards permanent members who are there full time. But what I really liked about that co-working space in Alcudia is that there's this kind of treadmill of people who are arriving, and you're going into an environment where there's lots of other people who are stopping by for a while. So you're not going in and feeling like you're an outsider there for a few days. There's a kind of a really fast moving environment. But yeah, I think look at what the co-working space is, or what the working environment that you would be able to have in the destination would look like. So I think that would be one of the foremost things. Another approach you could take is what you could even just look at it from the perspective of what are the places that you would like to travel to that you haven't been able to fit around your calendar previously, and would you be able to make a workation work there? It could be that you want to go on an extra couple of beach holidays a year. So in the UK, for example, you have package holiday organisers like TUI that now have a specific workations package offering, where they have, and it tends to be reduced rates. It might be whether you can stay, it might be for a longer stay. Like you could, some of these packages, I believe, for up to a month, but you can get workations packages in resorts for a week or two, where you could, if you're the kind of person who likes a package holiday, which is not what a typical digital nomad would be looking for. But if you're someone who is used to that more structured lifestyle where you take a couple of holidays a year, the opportunity to take workations mean that you could do that more frequently and book package holidays that have workation facilities in place, for example. So I think the starting point could be that what is the type of travel experience that you would like to have in general, and how could you fit your work around that, rather than it doesn't have to be the other way around.
That's so interesting. It's funny. I know that some companies are starting to sort of move towards more offerings for what you might call a long stay visitor. But yeah, I did not realise there was actually full-on packages like that from companies like TUI. So that's super fascinating. Going even more kind of smaller and a bit more, I suppose, like fun, I'm curious, what are your maybe top 3 things that you have in your carry-on in order to make your workation successful? So we talked about the sort of bigger, wider elements, but what would you say are always in your bag to make sure that your workation is also successful?
Okay, what would I bring? What the top 3 items in my bag to make sure my workation is successful? I'll begin with something that I think is just very simple and potentially obvious, but a portable laptop stand. So the first few times that we took workations, I think having a good ergonomic work setup is very important for getting the most of my work out of my working day at home. So whatever lightweight accessories I have that can, to at least some extent, replicate that environment where I'm going to work, if I'm not going to work in a co-working space, one of the most simple things I can take is my portable laptop stand, so I'm not sort of hunched over my laptop the entire time. So that would be one.
Funnily enough, a portable laptop stand is one of the more popular choices. So obviously, like normally you'd have the phone, you'd have your laptop, and the passport, of course. But I think the top ones are normally portable laptop stands, good headphones. It's all very sensible. What I love is it's all very sensible. It's never like, whoa, that's so surprising. So yeah, is there anything surprising?
Something surprising. So this is something that dates back to a birthday present that Lisa got me a couple of years ago, which was, this was amazing, by the way. So she took time to handwrite dozens of inspirational quotes about remote working, just inspirational quotes about life in general, and put them in a little jar.
Oh, cute.
And each day I would take a different one of these quotes out and put it on my desk. And that's something that's very easy to take with me. So it gives sort of a little moment of inspiration each day and a little piece of home as well each day to take with me. So I think you can probably buy like flip charts of inspirational quotes and that kind of thing. If that's the kind of thing that you think would motivate you, I think that's a really nice touch to take to recreate your remote desk away from home.
That's such a cute idea. I love that. And actually that really ties up our podcast super nicely with one final question. So, final question, fill in the blank. Home is where?
Where my desk is? I don't know. I try not to say something like ridiculously cheesy. I mean, no, actually, home is Lincoln. So for me, the whole point of workations is that I have a home. I have a permanent home that I have no plans to leave anytime soon. We often daydream and talk about maybe in the future we'll do this arbitrage thing where we will live in Chile for 6 months of the year and live in the UK for the other 6 months. So we have a constant summer or something like that. And maybe when we don't have a dog anymore and when we don't have family commitments at home, we might do that. But we have a home that we love. And for me, home is Lincoln. I love the city that I live in. I love that I can walk out of home every day and see Lincoln Cathedral. We have a blog about Lincoln as well, which is something that I love doing. And that I love being here to be able to do that. And I can have that home and I can still live that adventurous travel lifestyle in a much more meaningful way than I used to be able to because of the freedom that remote working has brought. So, yeah.
Love it. And I love how enthusiastic you said that as well. But anyway, Alex, it's been great to chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Remote Life. And thank you, Alex, for taking the time to speak with us. You can find more details about career gappers below. Thank you so much again for listening, and we can't wait to remote work with you again soon.